I could still feel it, the cold splash of water hitting my silk blouse, the laughter echoing around me. It wasn't just my nephew who had thrown it. It was everyone else at that ridiculous family brunch, smirking, pointing, and making sure I knew exactly how insignificant they thought I was. I adjusted my chair in my downtown apartment, the soft leather pressing under my thighs, and smoothed my blouse. The sunlight spilled across the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the skyline beyond. From up here, everything looked calm, perfect, so unlike that humiliating day. My phone buzzed on the glass table. I ignored it at first, letting the faint scent of coffee drift through my apartment. But the vibration persisted. Finally, I picked it up. Reading of the will, the message said. My chest tightened. Memories I had buried, the laughter, the sneers, the feeling of being dismissed, surfaced with alarming clarity. I breathed slowly, letting the warmth of the late morning sun fill my lungs. I could almost hear the splash again, the gasps, the snickers. I straightened my spine and ran a hand through my hair, feeling the smooth strands slip between my fingers.
I was not the same girl they had mocked.
I had learned, worked, fought, and hidden a version of myself that they couldn't even begin to imagine. And yet, a part of me wondered, how would they react when they saw the truth? A small, ironic smile tugged at the corner of my lips. Maybe, just maybe, it was finally time for them to stop laughing. I was 16 when it happened. My family had always loved to parade their judgment, but that day felt like a performance written solely to humiliate me. I had been wearing my favorite blue blouse, the one I saved for special occasions. I was trying to help my aunt set the table for some overblown brunch, balancing a tray of sparkling water and fresh juice. And then it happened. My nephew, barely 10, with a mischievous grin I would later never forget, flicked the glass right at me. The cold liquid hit my chest and ran down my arms. Everyone laughed, loud, cruel, triumphant laughter. I remember my hands trembling as I grabbed a napkin, trying not to cry, trying not to let them see how deeply it stung. My throat felt raw, my cheeks burned, and the world suddenly seemed impossibly large and hostile. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to disappear into the carpet, the walls, anywhere but here under their gazes that felt like needles. And through the haze of embarrassment, I heard the whispers, "Clumsy, always clumsy. She'll never amount to anything." But there was one voice, soft yet strong, cutting through the noise. My grandmother. She had been watching from the kitchen doorway, her eyes steady, full of warmth. She handed me a small, worn leather notebook. "Write it down," she said. "Your dreams, your plans, everything they say you can't do. This is yours.
Keep it close.
One day, they'll see who you really are." I clutched that notebook like it was a lifeline. Every night, I poured my thoughts, my fears, my ambitions into it. I traced the outlines of a future I didn't yet fully understand but was desperate to claim. And then I made my decision. I would not allow their laughter to define me. I would not remain the girl who got soaked and mocked, the girl whose confidence they tried to crush for sport. I remember walking out that day with my head high, my wet blouse forgotten, my grandmother's words echoing in my ears. Independence wasn't just a dream. It was a promise I made to myself. I would carve a path, step by painstaking step, and I would do it alone if I had to. That small, tattered notebook became my compass, my secret weapon, and the first spark of the life I would later build, far beyond the reach of their ridicule. The notebook became my sanctuary. Each word I wrote was a promise to the girl I had once been, the one drenched in water and laughter, feeling small and invisible. After high school, I moved to New York City, suitcase in hand, heart full of determination. I didn't tell anyone, not my family, not my friends back home, about my plans. I didn't need their approval. I had learned early that validation from them was meaningless. I found a small, cramped office downtown, sharing space with a seasoned consultant named Rachel. She had sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me the first day we met. "You've got fire," she said, sliding a contract across the desk. "Don't let anyone snuff it out." That was the first time anyone had ever told me I had potential without irony, without expectation of failure. I soaked up her guidance like sunlight, but the journey was far from easy. Long nights became my routine. I'd wake before sunrise, trading dreams for spreadsheets, client calls, and coffee that never seemed strong enough. I doubted myself constantly. Was I capable of more than just survival? Could I truly build something that mattered? But every time the voice of my grandmother echoed in my mind, I pushed forward. I learned to negotiate, to persuade, to stand firm when others tried to dismiss me. Slowly, meticulously, I began carving my place. The first victory was small but monumental, a contract with a mid-sized firm that no one else had wanted. I remember the exhilaration, the shake of my hands as I signed the deal, thinking, I'm doing this. I'm finally doing this. Then came the next, my first profitable venture, followed by a string of others. I saved, reinvested, built credibility, and quietly amassed what would eventually become my hidden empire. Through it all, I kept my family in the dark. On social media, I posted modest updates, pictures of lunches with colleagues or conference rooms, nothing that revealed the reality of my financial independence. I became a ghost in their world, seen but unknown, underestimated but powerful. And that power gave me a quiet thrill I had never experienced before, the knowledge that one day, the laughter they had poured on me would run dry. By the time I returned home for the reading of the will, I was no longer the girl drenched in water. I was a woman who had built a life that required no validation, no applause, no approval from those who had mocked her. My success was my own, forged in silence and resilience. I smiled to myself, smoothing the silk of my blouse before the elevator doors opened. The city below gleamed, and I knew that when I walked into that room, nothing would ever feel the same again. The house smelled exactly the same as it had when I was a teenager: cinnamon rolls, polished wood, and the faint, lingering scent of my mother's perfume. But the energy was different this time. The same family that had laughed at me, pointed fingers, whispered judgments, they were all gathered in the living room, waiting for the reading of the will. I stepped inside, and the room seemed to shift subtly, though they hadn't yet noticed. I paused at the threshold, letting my heels click softly against the hardwood floor. The sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, illuminating the same grand chandelier I remembered from childhood holidays. But unlike then, I was calm, composed, radiating a confidence that made my own reflection in the polished floorboards pause me for a moment. I let them look. Let them think they were seeing the same girl who had been mocked, the one they thought they had diminished. And then, slowly, I walked to the front of the room. My office bag, sleek and black, rested against my hip, but the real weight I carried was invisible. Years of struggle, resilience, and triumph. I let my eyes sweep over them. My nephew fidgeting nervously, my cousins whispering, my aunts and uncles trying to maintain their composure. They expected humility, maybe even an apology for past grievances. Instead, they got me. I know you've all been waiting, I said, my voice steady, smooth, carrying a tone that was impossible to ignore. But before the will is read, I thought it would be fair for you to understand who I've become. I unclasped the silver bracelet on my wrist, a gift from Rachel, my mentor, and let it glint in the soft light. I didn't come here to beg for recognition, because I didn't need it. I built my life. I am in charge of my career, my finances, and my future. And you're about to learn something important. I opened my laptop on the antique side table and projected a presentation I had prepared for this exact moment. Charts, portfolios, ownership certificates, company logos, all the milestones they never thought I would achieve. Their faces shifted, confusion first, then disbelief, and finally the creeping sense of shame. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My nephew's jaw dropped. My cousins froze mid-whisper. Yes, I continued, letting my words roll over them like a wave they couldn't resist. The girl you threw water on, laughed at, dismissed. She owns companies, controls investments, and has been financially independent for years. This isn't luck. This is work, resilience, and refusing to let your laughter define me. I watched as the room went silent. Not a giggle, not a whisper. The energy had shifted completely. For the first time in my life, I felt the power balance flip, the scales finally righted. The laughter had stopped, and in its place, something new, realization, awe, and, for some, shame. I didn't gloat. I let the truth speak for itself. They had all assumed weakness where there had only been determination, ignorance where there had only been action. And in that silence, I could almost hear the echoes of my grandmother's voice, reminding me that my strength was mine alone to wield. The room was quiet, heavy with the weight of realization. I could feel their eyes on me, some filled with guilt, others with shock, and a few with barely concealed envy. For years, they had laughed at my missteps, belittled my ambitions, and dismissed my efforts. Now, I held the upper hand, but this wasn't about revenge. It was about setting the record straight and ensuring the past didn't repeat itself. I took a slow breath, letting the tension settle before I spoke. I've come here not just to reveal my success, but to set clear expectations, I said. If any of you hope to benefit from the family legacy, there are conditions. This isn't arbitrary. These are lessons I've learned the hard way. My nephew, the boy who had thrown water on me, looked at me wide-eyed. I didn't mean, he started, but I raised a hand gently. Intent doesn't erase impact, I said softly, yet firmly. You will learn respect, empathy, and the consequences of your actions. You'll volunteer at the community center with me for 6 months. You'll learn humility by helping others, not mocking them. Turning to my cousins and aunts, I outlined similar conditions, commitments to personal growth, honesty in all dealings, and the elimination of toxic habits that had long shadowed the family. For some, it was as simple as taking responsibility for their finances. For others, it was about communication, repairing broken relationships, and supporting one another instead of tearing each other down. I made it clear, assistance would be given only to those willing to rise to these standards. No shortcuts, no excuses. I watched as they processed my words. Some visibly cringed, others nodded hesitantly, perhaps understanding for the first time that life had consequences beyond their laughter. My mother's hands trembled slightly, a mixture of pride and shame crossing her face. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't, I replied, voice steady, because you weren't paying attention. But now you will. I care about this family, but I will no longer allow old patterns to define me or dictate my life. Change is required, and it starts now. For the first time, I felt the weight of years of humiliation lifting. The laughter that had once pierced me had been replaced with a new dynamic, one where I commanded respect without anger, compassion without weakness. I had set the rules, and they knew it. The power was no longer theirs. It was mine, earned through perseverance, determination, and the refusal to be minimized. And as I watched them begin to nod, some hesitant, some almost defiantly, I realized the shift wasn't just about money or status. It was about values, integrity, and the transformation of relationships long strained. This was the moment I had been building toward, a moment of justice, but also of growth, for all of us. Weeks passed after the reading of the will, and I began to notice subtle changes. My nephew, once brash and careless, now approached life with a tentative mindfulness. He volunteered at the community center every weekend, his laughter softer, kinder, less directed at others and more genuine. My cousins, once entangled in petty rivalries, started collaborating on projects, asking for advice instead of scoffing at it. My mother called more often, her voice carrying warmth and a hint of humility I hadn't heard in years. I watched all of this with a quiet satisfaction, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. The room of laughter and ridicule that had haunted me for so long was gone, replaced by a space where growth, respect, and understanding could take root. I allowed myself to feel proud, not just of my accomplishments, but of the person I had become. Every sleepless night, every doubt, every small victory in silence had led me here. One evening, I sat by the window with my grandmother's old leather notebook in hand. Its pages had yellowed, edges frayed, but the words within were still alive. I traced my finger over the first entry I had ever written. The day I decided I would never allow their laughter to define me. I realized then that my journey hadn't just been about financial success. It had been about reclaiming my dignity, cultivating resilience, and transforming the relationships I valued most. I closed the notebook and looked out at the city skyline, the lights twinkling like reminders of every small step I had taken. Life was no longer a stage for ridicule. It was a canvas, and I had painted it with patience, courage, and deliberate grace. I understood now that the power to shape one's destiny is not granted by family, circumstance, or luck. It is earned, nurtured, and guarded fiercely. And as I finally allowed myself to rest, I whispered softly, more to myself than anyone else, a single truth that had guided me from that humiliating day to this moment of triumph. They laughed when I fell, but I rose higher than they ever imagined.